wonder if you could tell us, sir, about the Quran a little bit more. It opens up a fascinating world when we realize that the earliest versions, the earliest copies of the Quran did not have the pointing that would enable one to distinguish various consonants from one another, to know what vowels were to be put in various places, and so on. And that being the case, it becomes a very variant text. Combine that with the fact that there is so much in it that is not, contrary to its own claims, pure Arabic and clear language. It opens up a realm of possibilities that scholars have only just begun to explore, and I understand that you are one of them. Can you tell us a little bit about what you have found in your explorations of the original text of the Quran?
Well, first of all, we find, for example, that many of the stories found in the Quran have been taken over in a rather strange fashion, as I will explain, from the Old Testament, especially, particularly the first five books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, uh, and some passages from Psalms, for example.
Now, you're not
Uh,
talking about the retellings in the Quran of
yeah,
Old Testament stories, right? You're talking about something else. Is that right?
I'm talking about, yes, the stories found in the Quran which have been taken over from the Old
Oh,
Testament.
okay. Yes.
Often they have been taken over, as found in the Quran. There are certain elements which are missing, which don't make sense on their own. If you go back to the original Hebrew, or in some cases, in occasional cases, the Aramaic, you realize that some crucial element has been left out. For example, in the Quran, the story of Joseph and his brothers, when Joseph is tempted, there's an attempted seduction by the Pharaoh's wife of Joseph, and in that story, suddenly we are told that she has a knife in her hand, and we don't really know where this knife comes from and what it is for. But if you look at the original story, as told in for example the Old Testament, and as developed in the Midrashim, you realize that the knife was given uh, to Joseph in order to cut some fruit that he had been given earlier. But this is not mentioned, so we're left with a kind of obscurity until you look at the original story. There are many stories like that which are often explained away. For example, if you look at the Quran, and there's a certain verse which talks about supposedly a city called Bakka, and all Quran translations that I've looked at they will have a footnote saying another name for Mecca. No explanation is given. If you look at the classical Arabic commentaries, no explanation is given. It says, oh, this is an alternative name for Mecca, but it is complete nonsense. And if you look at it carefully, you realize that it is, in fact, a quote from a passage in the Psalms where he's talking about the valley of Becca. And it's got nothing whatsoever to do with a place called Mecca. And not only that, if you look carefully at the sentence which contains the sentence Baka in the Quran, and you compare it with the sentence as it occurs in the Psalm, there are incredible structural similarities in the words used, the vocabulary and the syntax. So it is much more than just a coincidence. Um, so these are some of the things. And more recently, I've been working with a scholar uh, working in Germany called Christoph Luxemburg, who takes obscure, hitherto at least, obscure passages in the Quran, and then he tries to show that these some of these words make more sense as Aramaic Syriac, which is a form of Aramaic, spoken by the Eastern Christians, the Nestorians. Um, these words make more sense if you translate them back into Syriac, and you get a better understanding of the obscure passage, which is quite an extraordinary discovery, really. Large parts of the Quran, according to Luxemburg, were written originally in Aramaic and then badly misunderstood and translated into Arabic. So what on earth is going on here? I mean, this is quite extraordinary.
Yes.
Now, his work has aroused a lot of controversy, but there are more and more serious scholars within Orthodox Islamic studies who are beginning to take his arguments seriously, including Arabic scholars. I can think of Professor Munta Yunus at Cornell University. His first language is Arabic, and he's convinced of that Luxemburg is onto something, and he has used Luxemburg's methodology to elucidate some passages himself. He has elucidated some obscure passages in the Quran himself, which I shall be publishing his two articles in my next anthology. So there are certain historians who also find the whole idea much quite plausible, because up to now the actual real linguistic background to 7th century Syria and Palestine has been neglected, grossly neglected, and it's extraordinary. They've looked at the Quran in isolation without relating it to what John Wansbach called the sectarian milieu from which the Quran was born, out of which the Quran came. It's time that people looked carefully at both the linguistic and the social-cultural background to the Quran.
Thank you. Now, shifting gears quite a bit in the remaining time that we have, I did want to touch on some of your other